Jesus here is reinforcing, friends, what he's been teaching them. He says, don't just work with people who can enhance your position. Don't be a respecter of persons. Go out and find them and love them and win them into the kingdom. We have a very serious responsibility. Secondly, Jesus tells us that if anyone causes one of these little ones who believe in him to sin, in verse 42 you'll read that, it would be better for him to be thrown into the sea with a large millstone tied around his neck. Wow. Parents, teachers, Christians, let's look at our example. What about our example? What about our influence? Are we causing anyone to stumble along the way? Since Jesus here is very plainly warning us about the attitude that we have towards anyone who causes someone else to stumble. What kind of attitude do we have? We must not cause anybody to stumble, to fall. Look at verses 43 to 48. Here Jesus points out to us how we can make sure that we don't stumble or cause other people to stumble, to fall, in other words. And here he speaks in very strong words. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life maimed than with two hands and go to hell where the fire never goes out. And if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life crippled than to have 2 feet and be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into hell, where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. Very, very strong words. Words that give us great deal of difficulty. But I want you to remember the context. Jesus is talking about our lives, our influence, about accepting people and the responsibility that comes from that. He's saying, if your hand is doing something that causes you to stumble, like many times people say, I don't know, I just saw the thing and I just took it. My mind was not there, I was not in it. My hands just caused me to sin. You know those people who give that kind of answer? They don't want to take responsibility for what they've done, so they blame their hand. So this is what the Lord is saying. If your hand is now causing you to sin, better chop your hand off. Better go to hell go to heaven without hands than go to hell with both hands. But please now, I don't believe the Lord wants anybody chopping their hands off. So don't go and say that I said now that you must go and chop your hands off. I don't even believe that Jesus wants us to chop our hands off. He's just saying, look at the thing that's causing you to stumble. Examine that carefully. He's trying to drive home a very important point. I don't think that he literally wants you to cut your hands off. ISIS is doing that, cutting heads, cutting hands, cutting everything off. We don't belong to that group. And if Jesus really wanted us to cut our hands off, I think we'll have nobody here with hands.
Sure.
But the principle is very clear. If something is causing you to sin, causing you to destroy yourself or one of these little ones, then we better get rid of it quickly. If by your action, you're causing people to go away from God. Work on it right away. Don't be a stumbling block. Earlier talked about having a beam in your eye and trying to take the speck out of someone else's. You know what's a beam? You know when Brother Balan there in the back, you know when he does his cutting, you get a little sawdust. Now sometimes that little dust gets in your eye, and I tell you it's a big problem. Because it'll affect you all day. It was a little thing. Now, you see that in some people, but you know, you got a big beam, you got a whole big deal in your eye. I don't know how it gets there and it stands there. Some reinforcement it must have for a big beam to be stuck in your eye. But you didn't see the beam in your eye, you're going to see the little dust in somebody else's eye. Isn't that amazing? It's true. We are too quick to find something in somebody else. But if you really look at yourself, you'll see something very big in your own life. Now, it's a good lesson. Jesus liked teaching it. You can understand these things, don't you? And so Jesus is making this very clear to us. What is he saying? He's telling us to examine ourselves. We get so busy judging others that we don't look at ourselves. Jesus says, look at your own life. If you're doing something you shouldn't do, you're causing other people to stumble. Get rid of it, because the alternative is hell. Brothers and sisters, our influence, our witness, our example is a very serious matter. It is far more serious than we think it is. Then we look at verse 50. He says, salt is good. But if it loses its saltiness, how can you make it salty again? That's an amazing statement, because I had to think about that, and only when I read that did I realize the depth in that statement. How do you resolve that problem? Once, there are different kinds of salt. You go to a shop, you just don't buy any salt. If you're a good chef, he will tell you what brand of salt to buy. When I saw those lists, I realized that these chefs knew something. Because different brands have different saltiness. There are some brands of salt that are powerful, strong. And so they have the quantity in mind when they have that salt. And I'm giving excuse for some young brides here who get messed up very badly with the cooking. It's just not you that put extra salt. You just had the wrong brand. You understand? There are some brands that don't have too much of saltiness, so you just have you just put a little extra. It was not your hand, it was the salt. And so Jesus is talking about losing your saltiness. And when you lose your saltiness, how do you make it more salty? You can't. That's what I discovered. You just can't. So what good is that salt? They throw it on the roads for road making. I've seen them throw salt. I don't know what kind of salt. I didn't taste it. But I've seen salt-like things on the road. Then I thought it must be this kind of salt they throw on the road. Because that's what Jesus said. When it loses its flavor, what good is it? Not good for anything. Throw it out, walk on it. We're supposed to have a flavor. And if you've lost your flavor, you've lost it completely. You're not worth anything at all then. fastest way for you to have peace is for you to stop judging one another and start examining ourselves. We need to examine what our hands are doing, what our eyes are seeing, where our feet are taking us to. Start looking at that. And I hope that we would have the courage to look honestly and see those areas of our lives that may be causing us and causing others to stumble. Be honest with yourself and get rid of those things before it is everlastingly too late. Absolutely too late. Whatever your needs are, Jesus can meet them. And He stands ready to meet them as we stand and we sing and we worship and we come into this place. He is here already. This is His house. And so all we need to do is to come confessing and come repenting. And He can change all of that for us. We may be in the church for a long time. We may be in the church for many years. But we have not learned anything of depth. Jesus wants us to learn some great lessons. There's a world out there that is desperate to hear the name Jesus. There's a world out there that is hurtling to a lost eternity. There's a world out there that does not know the right hand from the left hand. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of them. What kind of influence are we exerting in this time? What kind of influence that you have? Do you have that full capacity to flavor your environment? Do you have the capacity to flavor your community by your words, by your deeds, by your actions? Or are you one of those that want to be the greatest in the worldly sense? Because if you want to be the greatest in the worldly sense, Jesus says, you're not going to be great. You're not going to have any influence at all. And so I want to encourage you this morning, my dear brothers and sisters. I know this is a wicked, evil world in which we live in, and the influences of this world is so wrapping us up like tentacles that would not let us go. But we must, in Jesus' name, let go, let it go, and get back to the Word. Live the Word, speak the Word. Let the Word start manifesting the love and the goodness of Jesus in our lives. Yes, when we see the greatness of people, in the last week we were very saddened to hear about Miles Monroe and the way he died. And so everybody's on the bandwagon now about his greatness. Everybody wants to put up their pictures with him. Suddenly, we never saw that before, but all of them are looking for their pictures where they stood with him and they got their arms around him. Suddenly, it's going to make them great now that he's died. That's what they want. But it's not going to do anything at all. The man can't make you great. Standing with anybody, no matter how big they may be in the world's eyes, will not make you big. I've got to persistently tell people that there's no great men of God. There's only a great God. I've got to persistently tell people there's no faithful men of God. There's only a faithful God. Don't steal God's adjectives and descriptions. It belongs to Him. He is a faithful God. How can we call ourselves faithful? What are we faithful for? What have we done to be faithful? Peter, he had some sense, because even when they wanted to crucify him, he said, I can't even be crucified like my Lord. Because being crucified like my Lord makes me like almost equal in death with Him. I can't be. How can I die just like Him? He was my Lord and God. crucify me upside down. Where are the leaders, the real leaders today? They want to be more popular than Jesus. They don't talk about Jesus, they talk about themselves. And I warn you this morning, we're heading for destruction when we see ourselves as great. When we see ourselves as faithful. Yes, we must strive to the mark of perfection. We must strive for faithfulness. We must strive to bring honor and glory to Him. But don't ever advertise yourself. I keep asking people this question: where's the instrument that you can measure faithfulness? What kind of instrument you use to measure faithfulness? I know you can measure your temperature. I know how to measure your pressure. I got the instrument for that. I got the instrument to measure your sugar. I can check that out. But I don't know how to measure your faithfulness. Has anybody got that instrument? Do you know if anybody's got one? Then how dare you call yourself faithful? How dare you call yourself a great man of God? Who is great? Only God. It's time that we get our minds right, get our hearts right. Here the disciples are walking right behind Him, and they are fussing and moaning and complaining and trying to bicker about who's greatest. It's disgusting, isn't it? Now that we see it in its proper context. But that's exactly what we do all the time, ourselves. When we try to push one another out. When we want to be the one that's going to be heard and seen. When we want our voices to be known. We're really saying, I'm the greatest. There was a young African American who was doing very good in the boxing ring. And when he knocked off a great opponent, his first words were, I'm the greatest. I'm the greatest. Today, he's a far shadow of himself, dying. Dying. He said he was the greatest. 4 young boys from Liverpool hit the crest of the popularity straits when the whole world started to hear about them and their music. And what did they say? We are greater than Jesus Christ. We are more popular. What happened? One was cut down by an assassin's bullet, young in his prime. And that group is no more. More faithful, more popular, more well-known, the greatest group. That's what they call themselves. What happened to Nebuchadnezzar? That great king who thought he was the greatest king that ever lived. He finished the last days of his life on a grass patch, eating grass like an animal. That's what happens to everybody who takes on the greatness of the world. Be warned. If we're going to win this world and win our neighborhood, it's not going to take your greatness at all. It's going to take your humility and your servanthood. So put aside your greatness. It's not going to help you. Put aside all the great things that you can say and do. Jesus said, except you become like a child, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. He's talking about our total abandonment to His faithfulness and His greatness. And so this morning, let's come before the Lord Because this spirit of greatness is like cancer, and it's eating the church, it's destroying leaders, it's destroying the church, the Christians. Tomorrow when we go to our places of work, they ought to see a person that's like Jesus, who's humble and kind and gentle like Jesus. Not someone that is loud, not someone that knows it all. If you know everything, change your name to Google. That's a better name. We don't know it. Let's come before the Lord. Shall we bow our hearts before Him today?